I started teaching yoga. Actually, I started practicing yoga in 1968. So I was telling some people yesterday, one of the people who literally had to drag me to my first yoga class is still with me. We're still together and close. And that was, she dragged me there because basically I was completely out of my mind, consumed by the frustrations and the disappointments of my involvement in the civil rights movement and the anti-Vietnam War movement and some other significant, important issues on campus, like being able to have girls in our dorm rooms overnight. I started doing yoga and it was a revelation to me. The revelation was that I could do something that allowed me to feel really good, that when I got up the next day, I still felt good. In other words, I could do something to feel good that didn't involve drugs and alcohol. So I kept doing yoga. I kept doing it, and I kept feeling better. And I did more of it, and that felt phenomenal. And I noticed that in that process, that even though I was working in a grocery store. I was bagging groceries and stocking shelves when I wasn't bagging groceries. And it wasn't a terrible job at the time. It paid $4.25 an hour. And I was in a union. And $4.25 an hour in those days was actually a significant amount of money. But I hated it for a good reason. And I found in doing yoga that the good feeling that I was able to connect to in myself, I could hold through my day, whatever bullshit thing I was forced to attend to. And that was a revelation. It made it clear to me what the pathway was for my life. We come into this world, and as I was saying last night, wrapped in a package of tensions which has nothing to do with us. Wrapped in a package that I call the disappointments of our ancestors. The accumulated tension and trauma and misunderstanding that has been transmitted from the beginning of time through our ancestors to one another. Creating a kind of film around us that continuously undermines our ability to connect to ourselves and to each other. And I found this to be true of me, that I found that in the early part of my life, the choices that I made, the activities that I engaged in, were really me reaching to try to connect to something that would fill the empty space in me, the space that was empty because my parents could not fill it with the nourishment that children need. And they couldn't fill it, not because they were they were bad people. They were as good at human beings as they possibly could be. It wasn't their fault. Wasn't anybody's fault. No, they didn't have it to give. They just didn't have it. And I found myself repeating the same patterns over and over and over again that really didn't feel good at all and didn't like do a thing for me except make me feel bad and then make me feel worse and then make me think I was completely crazy, which I might have been. And then yoga comes along and you start to find that all the things that we're taught as children about the world and about the way we ought to be have absolutely nothing to do with anything. It's all a part of the package that we're planted in, called our karma in India, and I call it the disappointments of our ancestors. We are located in time and space because of that package of disappointments. And what we discover is the reason, well, let me put it to you this way. There is a reason why we're here. I'm going to digress for a second, but with a purpose. The reason that we are here, the reason everybody in this world is here, is one very simple reason. We're in this world to grow. We're in this world to grow. We're not here for any other reason. It's important to me to be respectful of you and say that it's not my job to explain what growing means to you. It is your job to figure out what that means to you for yourself. If I tell you, I can tell you what it means to me, maybe that doesn't mean that to you at all. We're in this world to grow. Growing involves, what does it involve? It involves taking in energy, releasing limitation, taking in energy, releasing poison, taking in energy, being transformed. The pathway to that growth, it turns out, is not in a belief system. People push the Bible, people push the Gita, people push, Patanjali Yoga Sutras and niyamas and yada, yada, yada. It turns out that in the history of human beings, everything we have ever believed has turned out not to be true. If you think about, just our understanding of space, of the world we live in, we used to think, just 500 years ago, we used to think that the Earth was the center of the solar system. And the solar system was the whole universe. And then we recognized that that wasn't true. And in time they began to appreciate that the solar system wasn't the entire universe, that there were a whole set of stars and planets and celestial objects that were much bigger than our solar system. They recognized the galaxy and thought that was the universe. And it was only actually since 1938 when that Doppler understood that our galaxy is one of, well, at the time they thought hundreds. Today we think, the popular idea is we think our universe is 14.2 billion years old. We think that it arose from an explosion, and there are various scenarios about what might be its outcome. This is the popular understanding. The astrophysical understanding today is that the only way the universe gets to be the size it is right now is if there was a period of extreme expansion, a period just after the Big Bang in which the universe expanded faster than the speed of light. That is problematical right there. So then, the guys who are trying to study and figure out this expansionary period come up with a set of equations to explain it that seem to fit only when they keep looking at the same equation. What it turns out is that the universe, if this is true, which they've measured it so far it works out, but the universe that we see is just the light that has gotten to us in 14.2 billion years. But in fact, the universe itself is 10 to the 1 million times bigger than that. Right, those numbers just don't compute in a human brain. 10 to the 1 million, and that our visible universe that we can relate to is 10 to the 28th of that 10 to the 1 millionth, which sort of makes it like what we're seeing about our physical reality is we're looking at a quarter on a street corner in Oakland. We're looking at the tiniest, we're looking at a flashlight on a wall in Oakland Coliseum. Actually, that's probably too small. Our physical universe is phenomenally huge, more than we can imagine. And its sophistication and complexity is most likely equally same. My point being, that was just a bar to say, everything we've ever believed about our world is not true. And so that brings us to a place where the pathway to growing and becoming and expressing the deepest, finest, purest essence, the best part, in other words, the very best part of ourselves that's possible, because that's what happens when you grow. Look at anything that grows. The pathway to that growth is, strangely, wildly, feeling good. The pathway to growth is feeling good. Who knew? The pathway to growing is feeling good. And that's why we do yoga, to feel good. And doing yoga and increasingly feeling better awakens, that feeling good awakens parts of us that are incredibly simple and powerful. Loosening the wrapping, loosening the tensions that bind us and limit us as a human being happens when we feel good. When our hearts, when our hearts can breathe and open, we feel good. And in that breathing and opening, we can actually feel ourselves, feel our real self, feel our true self. And from our true self, we can truly connect to others. And our physical circumstance and the possibilities that are present for us to express ourselves creatively in the environments in which we exist. We're in this world to grow. The best, the most efficient pathway I have ever seen toward this end, toward feeling good and growing, is yoga, which has, so now I'm going to talk about yoga. Most of you, when I say yoga, you think asana, but asana is not yoga. Asana is asana. It's the movement of the body. And one thing there are many things to be said about asana. The most important thing for me is if you ever in your life recognize that you really need to change, if you ever come to a place where, your feeling good has run up against a wall, or you're feeling so fucking bad you can't stand it anymore and you've got to do something, the simplest and most effective thing you can possibly do is start to move your body on a regular basis. Moving your body does what? It increases your circulation. Increasing your circulation is going to release tensions, and in the simplest way in a physical way in the beginning, make a flow. Poisons out, nourishment in. If you hold that, if you keep that circulation going, your body will clear of a lot of toxicity, a lot of tension. Tension and toxicity are the same thing. We call it toxicity when it's physical poison. It's tension when it's mental and emotional poison. It's just different dimensions of the same phenomenon. It clears, and you are again in touch with feeling good. But yoga, the classical definition of yoga is union, of of linking or of harnessing. So yoga in this context means yoga means to me 3 words. I explained this last night too. Yoga means contact, alignment, and flow. The linking is taking our attention and merging our attention, some people would say mind, but it's really our attention, into our breath. And linking our mind to our breath, experiencing the circulation of the breath within the body, and the distribution of the breath within the body, which to the people who created these systems of practice in the first place meant that the energy channels, the breath dissolves into lines of energy which have junction points. The lines of energy are called nadis, I call them channels. The junction points are called chakras. And observing these, the distribution of the breath into a system of channels and junctions facilitate is the revelation of a deeper level of circulation within us that supports our physiology. What we understand then is that we are not a physical event. We are energy. We already know this body is completely permeable. We don't think about it that much, but we're constantly taking in through our skin and all of our senses, we're taking in our total environment and internalizing it as information and organizing it, unconsciously to respond. What's that look like to you guys? Get it? Okay. I think it was in 1978. I was in South Fallsburg, New York, at Muktananda's ashram. And Muktananda was my second teacher and my sannyas guru. He made me a Swami. He walked into my room, which was really totally unusual. I was absolutely not expecting it. I'm laying on my bed reading a science fiction book. Muktananda just walks in the room. I wouldn't have expected him to knock anyway. And I roll off the bed onto the floor on my knees with my head on the rug. Because that's what we did. That was appropriate behavior for a disciple to their Indian guru. And I come up and Muktananda walks in and he looks over on the bed and he says, "What's that?" And I go, "Oh, that's some science fiction book." He looks at me and goes, "Don't read that. Read Shaivism." Okay. Well, having been involved in, by then through my first and root guru, Rudy, having been involved with Siddha Yoga, at that point for about almost 8 years. I had, enough of a background of Hinduism to know what Shaivism was, and in general, to try to understand the religious and spiritual geography of India. I had a general idea. But that really wasn't my focus. So I did begin to study Shaivism. Rudy had basically said, when I was with him, don't read any books, just practice. He felt books were useless. But I did start studying Shaivism, and I started causing translations to be done out of Sanskrit and out of French and out of Italian, so that I had access to all the ancient manuscripts that I possibly could get. I'm still doing that on a regular basis. And in about 87 or 88, I published the first English commentary on Tantric Shaivism called Dynamic Stillness. And established a system of practice called Trika Yoga. But I started writing about esoteric Shaivism even then. And the reason I'm telling you this is because if you understand that growing is the reason you're alive, and you embrace that reason as the basis of your life's work, whatever that work is, then I have a couple of suggestions for you, because we already covered the fact that no belief system is going to do it for you. And in fact, what we're going to discover as we grow up is that everything we believe is bullshit. That's what we're going to discover. And in the process of discovering that, either you are going to have a context that is growing in which you say to yourself, I am liberated from that misunderstanding. Hallelujah. Or your only other option is, my world is crumbling. I am so pathetic and out of my mind. Right? I mean, how could I have ever believed if you base your life on beliefs, you will not feel good. But still, if we're going to grow and we don't have anything to believe in and only a feeling to go on, how do we navigate the world? And more importantly, how do we navigate the minefield of desire and emotion that, is like inside us? How do we deal with our own biggest enemy? So I bring up my experience of Shaivism with you because what I'm going to suggest is, once we understand that we're in this world to grow, and once we appreciate that if that's our context, we have suddenly the power to take every experience, however painful, however destructive, self or otherwise, suddenly we have the possibility of taking every experience and internalizing it as nourishment And instead of like thinking of experience as lesson, in which we have to learn something in our head, you know, when you do that, of course, when you think of experience as a lesson and you try to learn something from it, what do you walk away with consistently with that kind of understanding? I'm stupid and that guy's an asshole. Where's that at? Let that build up for a while, and your good feeling is back to buried. And we are living in shit. So having a context of growing and developing the capacity to internalize everything as energy that has no mental construct that goes along with it, that simply structures itself deeply within our soul and transforms us through the release of tension and the expression of creative flow, requires, first of all, a commitment to growing, and it requires a model. And this is where I'm trying to get to for the moment. We need a model. We need a mental model, not something that we believe in, but just a flexible understanding that we are trying to build that will facilitate our growth. Sort of think of it as a flower pot for our simple beginning. Our flower pot, well, let's just say my flower pot is Tantric Shaivism. Ooh, I said that word. Just to cover it for you, when I say, because some of you I've never met before, usually when I say Tantric, most people think sex. And that's about the last, Tantric is all embracing, but the last thing I'm thinking of when I use that term has anything to do with sexuality. Tantric is a view of life. We need a model. And Tantric Shaivism as a model, I've thought about that for a long time. It has in the language of the system, it has two components. One is called Shiva, and the other is called Shakti. And we think of, what do you think of when you think of Shiva? Well, I don't know, we'll talk about that. But Shiva is intended in the system to mean awareness, and Shakti is intended to mean power. So reading the book, reading all the language, I'm constantly trying to think about what these words mean to me. In my real life, because my model has to help me in my daily life. It's like not hung up there in space somewhere that I can like travel to every now and again when I close my eyes or when I start to move my body. My model has to help me in my daily life. You know, when I was 23, my teacher died, Swami Chetanananda, who we called Rudy, died. He told all of his students if anything ever happened to him, they should look to me for guidance. So at 23, he suddenly disappears, and I'm left with 11 ashrams in America and 3 in Europe, and not a penny. And a bunch of crazy people who don't give a shit about me, but really want me to be Rudy, which was a gigantic recipe for failure. And so, sustaining that circumstance, which Rudy had given me to sustain, I had to set up a bunch of businesses because there was not a penny. I had to, as time passed, do a lot of different things, which have nothing to do with yoga or meditation or feeling good. And so my model really had to function in the real world. This isn't, off on the backside of the moon kind of stuff. Studying Shaivism, I'm looking at this simple definition of Shiva, and it basically says, in the book, it basically says Shiva can be defined by his powers, which are 3. Icha Shakti, Jnana Shakti, and Kriya Shakti. Ooh, that's a big help, isn't it? It took me a while, but I started to understand what Icha, Jnana, and Kriya Shakti meant. And it's so unbelievably simple. Kriya Shakti is inhalation. Jnana Shakti is exhalation. And Icha Shakti is the still point in between. That may not do anything to you, but to me it set off a whole bunch of bells when I got that. Dang. Because what that informed me of was that the essence of the entire universe, a universe beyond anything we could possibly imagine in scope and scale, in diversity of function, expression, the fundamental basis of it all is respiratory process. The way in which we connect to the whole, and that whole is like so big, is respiratory process. And this was interesting because it sort of lit up in my brain the understanding that in the Vedas, in the earliest cosmology that is written down in India, the first expression of the universe after it is created, or after it begins, is the first demonstration is Gayatri, or the breath of life. The breath of life. And this set off a lot of bells in my brain because when my guru died in 1973, I was totally committed to growing. And the next thing that happened to me, which was kind of amazing, was I was in Dallas, Texas, teaching at an ashram that we had there, and somebody in that group said to me, "Oh, I think you ought to meet this guy." So, and I said, okay. And I went to meet this guy who turns out to be a cranial osteopath. He turns out to be the guy who was the assistant to the person who established the whole field of cranial osteopathy and cranial sacral work. And his name wasn't Upledger. So I met Roland Becker. And over the next 18 years, Roland Becker and he became a mentor and a really profound friend to me, and I to him. And over the course of the next 18 years, he trained me in cranial osteopathy, to the degree that for the last period of his life, I was the only person he'd let treat him. And cranial osteopathy is when in studying that, I understood the whole connection between the goddess, kundalini, energy circulation, the breath, the body, and the mind. It all just like completely became clear to me. Rudy was an enormously powerful person, and I studied Kundalini Yoga with him, and I understood what that meant energetically, but I did not understand how that translated into a physiological form and function. And when I did, I understood that all life on earth was an expression of a respiratory process of the earth itself. And that respiratory process of the earth was totally in harmony with the respiratory process of the solar system, etc., etc., etc. What does that tell us, practically? It tells us that the power that has created the entire universe is at the core, the very essence of your life. That's what it tells us. And it tells us that were you to awaken that power, your life experience could only be expressed as unimaginable possibility. I grew up in a really tiny, shitty, dark, mean, industrial town in the middle of Indiana. It's about 10,000 people. There were 15,000 factory jobs there. Now there are none. And it was violent there, and I hated it. My high school teachers hated me. I probably really didn't generate much of a good feeling in them. I take responsibility for that. But the whole environment was just about tension. And so, and you know, since then, I have studied with the greatest living spiritual teachers in South Asia in this generation. I studied with Rudy, I studied with Muktananda, I spent 5 years with Ananda Maima, and 1 month a year every year for 5 years with Ananda Maima. I knew Satya Sai Baba and yada yada yada, and I studied Shaivism with Swami Lakshmanju. I've traveled all over India, everywhere. I lived in Nepal half the year for 18 years. I've been in Tibet over a dozen times. I studied with a Tibetan, the last living lineage holder of a 1,000-year-old lineage of Tibetan Buddhism, and I hold And I've received lineage transmission in that. I've traveled to Japan, Indonesia, all over China, Europe. I've never been to South America. I've been to parts of Africa. I have met, anyway, the point being, I have this life that I could not have possibly imagined, that has rolled out from a simple understanding and a commitment to a simple experience, which has given rise to the expression of continuous and unimaginable possibility. And I always feel like if I can do it, anybody can do it. But we need a model. I also want to say one thing too, and that is, last year my mother came to live with me for the last 6 months of her life. My mother and I were never close, ever, because I was the oldest of 6 kids in a row, and at age 5 I turned into the assistant and I wasn't a kid anymore. I wasn't her child, I was her helper. Then I became, as she went back to work to help support that mess, I became, the chief babysitter. We were never close. And furthermore, she's fundamentalist Catholic, and when I saw through that when I was 15, but when I turned 16, I never went to church again. And I have, 4 brothers and sisters left, all of whom were close to them. So it was stunning to me when my 4 brothers and sisters reject my mother right after my father dies and bury her in a nursing home, and she's in a state of shock. So I bring her to the ashram. My mother arrives at the ashram, Kentucky, fundamentalist Catholic, recently lost her husband of 68 years, in shock, and with all of her defense mechanisms completely wired to blow. Do you know that I held her hand as she passed away. In the last week of her life, I had the 3 most perfect conversations anybody could ever have with their mother. She told me, she said to me at one point, I really get it. It's not about what you believe, it's about who you love. Then she says to me a couple days later, in the morning before she died, she said, if I'd only understood what you were doing, I would have wanted to be a part of it. As my mother died, I held her hand and was doing a guided meditation for her. And I literally, and Jen and a few people, there were other people there, literally saw my mother ascend. We watched her spirit leave her body and go. And she tried, right before that happened, she tried to open her eyes and look at me, and she had no color in her eyes. I knew she was gone. I'm telling you that story because my mother was 89 and a half. And for 89 of her years, she held on to all of her boundaries so tightly that, it completely undermined any possibility of a conversation ever. And in the last 6 months, for whatever reason, she was able to see that she was loved, and she was able to take that energy in and then give it back, and she got the flow. She got it. And in the last 6 months of her life, she completely changed, and she died profoundly grateful and totally in bliss. And if she can do it, it means that however old we are is completely irrelevant. It means that as long as we are alive, we can grow. We need a model. I don't care what your model is. You don't need my model. I like my model. Doesn't have to be your model. But you gotta get that you need a model. You have to have that if you're going to grow. If you're going to avoid years of confusion, you have to decide, this is my model and I'm gonna learn it and I'm gonna work in it until, well, you know, I had a model when I started this, and there's some big similarities between my model today and my model when I was 22, 21, but it's absolutely, definitely not the same model. And by now, I love Tantric Shaivism, but I'm not interested in it at all. It's not my model anymore. Because that was then 1,000 years ago, and this is now. But my model now, which has evolved and evolved and evolved, is based in Shaivism, because in Shaivism there are practical experiences that are articulated, which are essential to our growing. One of them being Shaktipat, or the establishing of an energetic connection and the transmission of the sharing of information and experience without words. Plus, Shaktipat means the awakening of respiratory process within us. I'll get back to that in a minute because that's what we're going to do next. But we need a model. Growing is the whole reason you're here. There ain't no other reason. You're not here for relationship. You're not here for career. Or a job. Are you kidding me? Seriously. Think about it. Why are you here? I sit on the freeway some days. I don't go on the freeway often, but when I do, I drink Dos Equis. I look at all these cars with all these people, or I sit in an airport and look at all the coming and going. Does anybody really understand what they're doing? Where they're going? Why they're going there? Really? We need a model. And personally, I think, as a part of that model, we need a teacher. And, you know, there are now 10,000 yoga styles. How many yoga styles are there? I mean, a lot, right? We need a teacher. And we need a teacher at least to help us to build our model. Because it's one thing to like intellectually try to absorb a model, whether it's a yoga style, whether you start with with the physical body and a physiological process model of your yoga practice, or you start with or you move into from moving your body into a meditative practice, which is about circulating the breath of life inside you. Whatever it is, you need a model that you're going to study, and it can't just be intellectual. You have to be able to have somebody you can bring questions to and work out, your own perspective on your experience. A teacher is not, doesn't exist for you to like give them, they should not be the person who gives you their perspective and you absorb it. It should be a subtle and gross conversation that is supporting you evolving your own perspective. And if something a teacher says to you rings true, hang on to it until it doesn't ring true anymore, and then change it for yourself. But you need a teacher. You need somebody to work through the creation of this model with, so that, as you move through your day, you have the capacity to take in your experiences and really digest them in a simple and deep way and actually truly grow. And you will know you are growing because you will be feeling good. That is your baseline. I want to share with you a model. Instead of the universe, we're going to think of the ocean. In fact, while we have the geographers identify different oceans, all the oceans are connected and flow into each other. And so we can say, actually, by now, there's only one ocean. And that ocean, has as its subtle physiology, what part of what makes that ocean alive is that there are currents in it. And currents happen to distribute heat and pressure through environments. There's circulation. In fact, the ocean is expanding and contracting in relationship to the larger environment of the solar system, particularly the moon. And in that respiratory process that we call the tide, the breath of life within the ocean arises and subsides. And as it arises and subsides, it generates major internal circulation patterns. We have the Atlantic currents that come out of the Caribbean and circulate toward the Arctic, and then down the west coast of Europe, back and across at the equator and Africa, back into the Caribbean again and again and again. That's true also in the North and South Pacific as well. There are major currents. And those major currents have a jillion minor currents. And those jillion minor currents have another trillion subcurrents. And the whole ocean is alive with circulation. But when we go to the ocean, in one particular place, we see the effect of that circulation in the rising and the subsiding of the tide and the changing of the wave patterns. They have big wave, we could go today. I think the waves are really big out there today. I was in Santa Cruz yesterday and I was like, wow, huge. Behind those huge waves, there were secondary waves, and also on top of that there was chop. You see, the whole ocean is alive with respiratory process. All the various life forms within the ocean are participating in that respiratory process. All the life forms are breathing, taking in nourishment, exhaling toxic byproducts of metabolic process. Their form and function is completely interdependent on the area of temperature and pressure in which they exist. The deeper you go into the ocean, the more exotic the form. On the surface, toward the surface, you have coral reefs and a billion different kinds of physiological forms. It's really amazing, but the one thing they all have in common is respiratory process and the life of the ocean. Okay, so that respiratory process is constrained by the land. The land, to some degree, is a function of temperature and pressure, because what we're going to understand is, as global warming happens, there's less and less ice in the world and more water, which makes less and less land. Well, for each of us, our physical bodies are a constraint to respiratory process. And the tensions that, and literally the genetic trauma that has been, trauma, disappointment is passed on to us genetically. This isn't a psychological event. This is in our core. And that process constrains the breath of life within us and its function. So Shaktipat, the awakening of Kundalini, the lifting of our spirits. Kundalini is really simple. It's just lifting our spirits. If we really lifted our spirits every single day, what you would find is that your spirit, your own spirit, has its own life. It has its own intellect. It has its own information, which vastly transcends anything that is available to your mind. So, Shaktipat is the transmission of energy, a contact with a dynamic system that releases tension and allows your creative energy to flow. It releases the tension deeper within you and allows the subtle dimensions, the prana, the chitta, and the para dimensions of Kundalini, dimensions of respiratory process, to begin to awaken and function in you. Dimensions of respiratory process that are completely constrained by, our tensions and lack of flow. When we feel good, our tensions are less and our flow is more. Awakening Kundalini, lifting our spirits every single day, circulating our energy, becoming aware of our breath and our creative energy in ever more deeply subtle dimensions, makes creative capacity available to us to the degree that we can have the sense that our life is permeated, is filled with joy and unimaginable possibility. And how far out is that? In the yoga world and in your yoga stuff you do, think of respiratory process as the goddess. The goddess is respiratory process. Whatever the name of the goddess is that you're thinking about or hearing about, that is just one dimension of respiratory process. Shiva's Shakti is his breath, is the breath of life. And respiratory process is the basis of awareness. It is the basis of consciousness. It is the basis of mind. Mind and body are completely and totally interdependent. The power that has created the whole universe is available to you simply by connecting to and becoming aligned with and flowing in your breath, which is the breath of life, and taking your attention ever more carefully and deeply into your breath. Your own divinity becomes revealed. And this isn't an ego trip, because the divinity that is revealed in you is the divinity of the entire cosmos, which is vaster than we can possibly imagine. The whole understanding of the goddess is that it is the goddess who is breathing us. The goddess is respiratory process. The divine essence of our life. And that goddess is called Kundalini. It is Kundalini that is breathing us. And then ever on each scale, from the smallest, tiniest scale of subatomic particles to perhaps an infinite number of universes the size of the universe that we exist in, on each scale, respiratory process is the source. Physiological, some form and function is the effect. The goddess exists as the essence of our life, and our practice, contact, alignment, and flow is to make contact with that divine power within us, align ourselves mentally and emotionally and physically with that power, that from within ourself, the field of our experience can be, with every breath, enriched and re-enriched and re-enriched. And we can become established in a life experience that is filled with joy and the abundance of our own divine creative energy. So what we're going to do now is that we'll meditate, and I'll come around and put my hand on each of you. What's going to happen is I'm going to leave my hand there till I feel that the shift in your system that happens when the energy starts to move. Then you don't need me to have my hand there anymore. I'm not going to move my hand till I am aware that a change has happened for you. Could be a big change or a small change. It's not my job to say. It's the goddess's job to do. I'm only going to I could describe it as, I'm going to pray that she wakes up for you. That's not really an accurate description, but it's an adequate description. What I'd like to ask you is that for 3 days you make no judgment at all about your experience. For 3 days. If you think 3 days from now nothing happened, okay, fine. But wait. And the next thing I'd like to suggest to you is that for the next few days you keep it really simple. Meaning, argue with nobody for any reason at all. Because, what's going to happen is, as a change starts to happen for you, something in your environment will be provoked. That's the way, we have a positive uplift in our energy, which 100% of the time provokes a negative loop in our field to start to arise, to constrain the expansion of our energy. And sadhana, spiritual practice, is about developing enough discipline and self-control to stop fighting. And then the next layer of that is to stop doubting, so that we can come to the experience, the simple experience of feeling good. Because what do? We fight with that asshole, which makes us feel like we're stupid, because it does nothing, and then we feel we're stupid. And this is the duality that keeps our daily life in a constant state of self-destruct. So let's not argue with anybody for just a few days. 3 days from now, you feel like getting in an argument, knock yourself out. Save the other person the trouble of knocking you out. Compassionate. Okay, so meditative experience begins with proper posture. The most common improper posture that I see people engaged in meditation is they drop their chin toward their chest. When you drop your chin I just want you to think about this for a moment as a practical point. Drop your chin to your chest and try to open your heart. You want to hold your chin slightly elevated. Okay? Zen practitioners, and there's lots of Buddhists in the Bay Area, might sit like this, or they might sit like this. Okay. We don't sit like that. Thumb and forefinger together. Put your hands on your thighs at the place where, not too far forward because that's going to bring your shoulders forward, and not too far back because that's going to pressure your lower back. You want to find the place on your thigh that supports your shoulders and your posture being straight and relaxed and your chest open. Okay, so sit like this. Then I would like you to, when I practice myself, it is my discipline every single time to, on the inhale, become aware of my breath, and I take my attention to my feet, and I curl my toes and relax them. And I relax my feet. And I take my attention to my ankles, and relax them, and my calves and relax them, and my knees and my thighs. I feel my body and I relax it. I am making contact and allowing the natural, inherent alignment in each of the parts of my body to begin to express itself. Then I move to my abdomen, my chest. Deep breath, exhale, relax your chest. I squish my fingers and relax them. My forearms, my upper arms, my shoulders. Thank God. Relax. That feels really good already. I swallow in my throat, relax my throat, relax my neck, relax my ears, my jaw, my cheeks, my eyes. I breathe straight up my nose right into the middle of my brain a couple of times and relax my brain. And close my eyes, and turning my attention to my breath, become aware of the breath and what it feels like to breathe. What's it feel like to breathe? It feels alive. Now I tell myself, I really deeply want to grow. And I might do that 3 or 4 times. Actually, I only do it once, but I've been doing that for 45 years, and sometimes I have spent months doing nothing but that. Tell yourself, I'm in this world to grow. And having settled into that understanding, take your attention into your abdomen. If you can feel your sex chakra, take your attention there. Breathe directly into that chakra, and breathing in, say silently to yourself, Om Namah. And exhaling, Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya in your sex chakra. And then on the Shivaya, lift, as you Shivaya, you exhale, bring your attention into your heart. Not the pump, your heart. And again, breathing directly into your heart, Om Namah, and exhaling Shivaya. And on the exhale, shift your attention to your third eye. And again, Om Namah Shivaya. On the exhale this time, let the breath rise from the third eye out the top of your head. And bring your attention back to the perineum, your sex chakra, and start again. We're going to concentrate on waking up the 3 sections of your energetic mechanism. The base, the prana dimension of Kundalini, is about your physical and physical and constitutional strength and vitality. The middle section, the Chitta Kundalini, based in your heart, is about your emotional and intellectual clarity and range of motion. And the chakra between your eyebrows is a whole nother discussion, but that is the seat of your bliss. Seat of your bliss. We're going to work in those three chakras. Om Namah on the in-breath, Shivaya on the out-breath. Now, keep your body relaxed, and when you space out, and I guarantee you you're gonna, because that's what happens every time, it doesn't make you a bad meditator, it just means you haven't practiced enough. When you space out, come back and start. When you realize you've been gone, come back and make contact with your body, relax it. Make contact with your breath and begin your mantra again. They say about masters of anything that a master has made, 10,000 times more mistakes than a beginner. And I myself have started over 100 million times. That's what we do. So, Om Namah Shivaya. Then I'll come around and work with each of you.